Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures Podcast with Tommy and Mike. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Mike. Missed you already.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, we're back in another episode today. We are now just beginning our summer adventures. So I think your kids are already out of school, Tommy. My kids are almost out of school. It's going to be a whole new world when you have little ones running around out in the house when you're working in the basement all day. So always fun.
Oh, man. I mean, it's already been a whirlwind for this weekend of birthday parties, soccer games. The kids didn't know what to do today. Yesterday, they had no idea what day it was, and honestly, I think the structure is better for them. So
awesome. Well, before we get into our main topic today, our main topic today is around shortcut mania. There are so many different places for shortcuts. What are their use cases? How do you see organizations using this? Is it a security mechanism? Do you use it inside your organization? Do you use it to connect to other data sources? What are the places where we can kind of use shortcuts? So we're going to unpack some articles. There's 3 articles from Microsoft blog that we're going to talk about what's new with OneLake shortcuts, managing connections with shortcuts, and then OneLake shortcuts as well. So we'll put those links in actually they're already in the description already, but we'll also go and put them in the chat window as well. Before we do that, I do have a quick, something I've been learning, a beat from the street, as we like to call it, just kind of something that we're working on. Tommy, do you work with a lot of Power BI embedding things? I don't think you do a ton.
So not a ton for like the custom applications.
You embed in like SharePoint and like Teams,
exactly.
right?
Everything that's the business business, not necessarily when it comes to the custom embedding.
So I do a ton of embedding, and just recently came across something that I found was interesting, and just wanted to throw it out there just for a knowledge sake for something. That's why you listen to the podcast, something to learn. So today I learned that you can embed a composite model. So composite models, you have composite models where you have a model of models, right? So you have a analysis services model, and maybe there's some tables in it. There's a second analysis services model that directly queries the previous one, and then maybe add some additional tables, some additional, SharePoint tables or things from Excel. But basically, you have 2 semantic models that are able to render the Power BI report. Well, in doing some digging, embedding these things are quite complicated because you have to, especially if you have row level security applied, you have to apply row level security. And I'm not 100% certain on all the details, but like you could apply row level security to each model independently, I believe. You have 2 different security models for each of those reports. So you could have one report with some security tables, and then the second direct query table could also have some security with it. And in order to pass all that information in to get a embedded token, you need to be able to find both semantic models, get their IDs, and understand both of their row level security. All right, all this to say, it's definitely possible for you to do Power BI embedding with these nested semantic models supporting the report.
Doesn't sound fun at all.
It's not fun at all, and it's quite complicated. And the APIs you need to do to go get the information, they're not really there. There's actually not a really good way of looking up additional details around the data set IDs that you need for this reporting. So it's actually quite difficult. The APIs that Microsoft gives you, either in the Power BI or Fabric side, don't seem to be very clear as far as getting a very clean lineage of all the items that exist and all the data sets that you care about to render the report.
So actually, can you walk me through, because the complexities there, right? Is that something
it's complex.
Did you get pen and paper out and like before you started? Because
no,
I feel like you had everything in your head.
Really, what it boils down to is someone was trying to embed something, and they're asking us. Again, we do a lot of this embedding stuff already. We've done well over 27, 28 embedded projects at this point in time. So we spent a lot of time just working around embedded, and we know a lot of things about how to do it. Someone came to us and said, "Hey, we've got a problem. This thing seems to error out every time we try to embed it." We're like, "Well, that's interesting. We've not seen that before." So after we dug into the problem, we realized, oh, well, we can embed it. It just requires a lot more information to do the embedding. And it's just difficult. It's just really challenging to figure out how to connect all the things. You'd think there'd be like a nice little API that says, "Hey, give me all the data sets or data sources of this report or semantic model, and you could just call it and return all the data. Well, in a composite model, you get the first layer of data, but you
Yeah.
the second layer of data. The second semantic model and its definition is much harder to come by.
So, from the testing point of view, Mike, because there's been a few things in Fabric, and we might get into shortcuts too, where you realize the kind of like testing in the different areas where having that testing plan is so important, kind of thing. The days of just building semantic models, how easy they were, how simpler times that we were in, besides what we have now. Because honestly, Mike, I've been doing a ton, not the exact same embedded, but projects where I'm kind of writing everything out with literal pen and paper before I'm just muddling around in the tool and like, oh, I'm just going to change a few configurations, because you have to make a mental map of these things. I don't think people realize.
Yeah, I don't go to pen and paper because it's very difficult to share pen and paper with your teammates that in a different computer,
Yeah.
and like, so I don't really do that. But I will say to you, Tommy, though, like in exchange for pen and paper, we use Miro a ton. So to your point, right? So when you're going to make a change to a model, especially a model that you don't own or someone else gives to you, it makes a lot of sense to be able to stand back and look at it and go, what tables do I need to change? What is the impact of this change? Is there a more efficient way of doing this data design? And I think where I see it right now is where our data modeler people, you could data model fairly straightforward before using Power Query and such. Yeah. Because we own more or have the potential to own more of the back end. And what I mean by that is like Fabric, lake houses, tables, warehouses, SQL databases, the data structure itself. We actually have more capability now to make our DAX easier because we can shape the data a bit further upstream, which I think is very powerful. But it also comes with a new set of like, now you're opening up this whole new world of things you may need to learn or figure out how to do. So I do agree with you, Tommy. Like we do a lot of analysis before we make major changes because you don't want to break something or make it less performant than it already is. But anyways, that being said, I do agree with you. You should definitely take a metered look at the report, the model, before you do a bunch of changes to it.
Yeah. Awesome, dude. Well, love to hear. Always embedding is the one way to start off your week. But Mike, there's some new
it's not an easy topic to start with.
No.
So anyways, all this to say, we learned something. I wanted to share the knowledge that we learned back to our audience in case you are doing things embedding. Again, as a wrap up or a summary, would I embed composite models? Yes, you can. Do I recommend it? No, I would not. If you can get away with not having to do a composite model to embed, I'd recommend not doing that for simplicity's sake.
Awesome. Mike, I do have a little better news for you. Fabric blog, they actually put Databricks in one of the titles of their blog. This actually just came out a few days ago, integrating Fabric with Databricks using private networks.
Mm-hmm.
So let me add this to the chat for you. But I thought this would be right up your alley. Mike, you do a ton with Databricks as well.
I do. I'll look at this with the private network. So this is very nuanced. It's not a Databricks feature. It's more about when you build Power BI things or you have private networks for Power BI, you are now able to integrate that on top of the private network. I think that's what this article is going to speak to about those things today. So I'll throw the article in there in the chat window as well in case you do use Databricks. I know a lot of our listeners do actually use Databricks. I've heard some comments back and forth. So the odds are very high that Databricks is likely a part of your ecosystem. If you're, especially in a larger organization. I think I just saw a report this morning. I was reading some news, and I believe Databricks is now announced as the leader in AI for all AI companies. And there's like Google, there's Microsoft, there's all the big players there. But Databricks is the leader in that space. Ability to execute and visionaries in this space, which I would kind of agree. I've always felt Databricks has been like a notch above everyone else. So they've kind of been the leader in this race, I feel like.
Mike, also starting today too, the last kind of quick news, and I thought you'd have a little fun with this, but did you know it takes 3 commands on your terminal to create a SQL database now? So another update Microsoft has where they're actually just saying, hey, how to create a SQL database using the Fabric command line tool. And it's basically only 4 lines of text, which creates a database. Mike, this goes back to something I said. It shouldn't be that easy to create a database.
I mean,
Should it?
I create databases by going just to the UI and just clicking the button, and
Well,
it just shows up.
Yeah.
One thing I will say though that I really like about the SQL, so yeah, yes, you can spin up the SQL database. Yes, you can do other things. One thing I really like about the SQL database is it's actually really easy to set it up and even put a sample data set in it
I know.
for like training and educational purposes or just getting started with something. When you have data systems that come with a sample data set that's easy to just like have it just show up. Oh my gosh. That's so nice to have that capability. So whoever's been making the decision on the Microsoft side to make sure that every data system that you spin up has the ability of having a sample data set with it that's a brilliant idea.
I always like to test it with my own data, anything, but then again, it's that integration, pushing it in. And honestly, yeah, we've talked about this kind of the sample things too when you're trying to learn something. I've been avoiding now lately just trying to integrate immediately some of the existing data that I have because my goal is the tool, right? Not necessarily what's in my data at that point. And it's
Correct.
very easy compared to Power BI when you want to learn something. I feel like it's the best when you're actually using like your Spotify history. But there are too many things right now when it comes to pushing data over to SQL database right now. I'll give you a good example. Remember, Mike, we talked about the pushing data from a semantic model, pushing that to a lake house as a shortcut. And I was intrigued. What if I can then push theoretically that semantic model table to a database, right? It should be pretty simple with the copy job.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the things that you don't know in the copy job is there are certain types or values allowed in column names in the SQL database.
Yep. Yes, correct.
So, and unfortunately, Copilot is like, hi, you can't do that in the SQL Analytics endpoint. I'm like, I'm not in the endpoint. But there's a lot of things too where you don't know those errors. And I'm like, all these little kind of tidbits and gotchas. We're dealing in a world of gotchas right now. And you don't want to get thrown off with either your own information, but I'm finding a ton of, hey, why is it doing that? What's the error? All I see is an error code, but doesn't really tie into anything.
It's interesting that you say that because I feel like a lot of, I mean, if I look across the spectrum of all the different tools that are being produced from Fabric, we are in this phase of it works, but there's like all these little like feature of life improvements that are kind of not being done yet. I think we'll get there, but in a development world, it seems like you just want to get the product out the door enough that people can use it. And then you come back and then people provide feedback around, well, hey, we tried to use this application. One example that I had recently was I was trying to experiment more with Fabric Fabric user data functions. So basically UDFs inside Fabric. And so you can edit them or you can open them up in VS Code. So I was like, oh, I'll open up in VS Code. I'll use the extension that they give you. Does it all work? You sign in. Great. I was able to modify the code, but it wasn't very intuitive to me on how do I publish my user data function back to the service. I would think you'd be very similar to like GitHub, right? You'd bring the code down, you'd make the changes, you could, run them locally if you wanted, and then you could, push or say submit changes or synchronize changes back up to the service. I wasn't able to find that very easily. So it's all these like little like feature improvement things. Like, why doesn't it have a button for that? Where's the UI to support this, what I would think would be a simple update feature on top of something? That's the kind of stuff I'm like, this is not really what I want.
You're opening up all these products that are very much have, again, like a lot of allowed properties, like the SQL database with no columns in the space or certain date times that don't jive well with Power Query, even though they want you to talk about that integration. And this is why there's been so like these previous jobs or careers had their long education, because it wasn't just someone who knew how to create a database, but they knew all of those ins and outs of, okay, this version of this column won't work if we try to do X, Y, and Z. All those things still apply in Fabric. They didn't make a database easier on the back end. They just made
Yeah.
it easier to create. So honestly, for a lot of people, I don't want to say concerned because I still love that we have this access, but you have to know that they did not simplify the back end for you. There are still principles that apply whether you're dealing with Spark or
Hmm.
you're dealing with databases.
Agreed.
All right, man. I think. Do you have anything else?
No, I don't have any other news or topic main items. We can go into the main topic now. Tommy, give us a run through of the main topic. Just give us a detailed run up of what we're going to talk about today, and then we'll start there.
Shortcut mania. Speaking about simplifying your life. So shortcuts in Microsoft Fabric are a really completely different approach to how we manage our data in Fabric, where what we're actually allowed to do is not mirror or copy or move our data around, especially when we're reusing a lot of the same sources or tables, and simply allows us to point to certain tables or sources that already exist in Fabric. I can point to a table in my lakehouse and I can have that show up in multiple lakehouses. I don't have to worry about refreshing it. I don't have to worry about data being copied. It's simply a pointer, almost working like a system link in a Windows Explorer. But this ability, Mike, to rather than having recreate the wheel or then have some way to connect to that data, making sure it's all up to date. Shortcuts have been by itself when they were introduced pretty right out of incredible, but now they've been adding a ton of features that just make shortcuts honestly changing to me the architectural model I have in my head to how I'm actually building in Fabric, how I'm designing my lake houses, and what approaches to take to utilize shortcuts the most. So a pretty good job of shortcuts. Anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think shortcuts are interesting because depending on what system you're using, there's a little bit of a blurry line in my world, or I feel like in my mindset here. Sometimes when I'm using a shortcut, very clear when we're talking about Fabric to Fabric items, right? This is a lake house in Fabric, and there's another lake house in Fabric. When you're shortcutting across those things, it seems to make a lot of sense. When you're doing mirroring, a mirroring is, if you think about SQL databases, it's actually reading data and storing data down in the lakehouse. That's part of that mirroring exercise. When I do other things like mirroring with Databricks, and I would assume mirroring with Snowflake, you're not actually copying the data in, and those mirroring experiences are acting more like a shortcut. So there's like a blurry line between when we're talking mirroring and when we're talking shortcuts. So I think for most of the conversation today, we're going to talk in the purest form of like shortcuts inside Fabric, and we're talking lakehouse to other lakehouse shortcuts. Right. That's what we're kind of discussing, I think. Right?
It's perfect for me. So, Mike, okay. I just want to start off too with just some of the updates that Microsoft came out with at Build, just to talk about where they're going with this. They spent a lot of time with it. When I created a shortcut in the past, and I was super cool with this, I could see that I had a shortcut in my lake house, but it was very hard to see where it came from. To manage it, to rename it, I just got a nice little icon that said, hey, this is a shortcut, which was fine. But again, when you're dealing with multiple tables, you want to make sure you're dealing with the right thing, or you may need to point to something else. Well, we have finally the ability to manage our connections in shortcuts. And this is really, to me, getting to the heart of OneLake. We're making it a lot easier in my particular lake house to utilize, okay, what the source is, where my connections are coming from. And I can even then change that source. So this opens up a ton of really potential testing where we can have our dev and prod, but we won't get into that yet. Really, before, if I wanted to point to a different table and a different shortcut, I had to remove a shortcut and add a new one. But now
which is very clunky.
Yeah, I mean, and very clunky.
Yeah, and I think even if you named it wrong, like you couldn't rename it, there was no edit or capability there either. So if you named a shortcut incorrectly, you'd have to delete it and replace it, get rid of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think this is a very good feature here, and I do like this experience. The new replace button on top of that, I think is a big win. This is something that should have been there from day one. It's nice to see that this is what we were talking about earlier. Like these are some of these paper cuts that are like, I don't want to delete it and replace it. I don't know what that's going to do downstream. I just want to replace or update it. And there may be some really interesting implications there too, Tommy, right? So if you think of like the default semantic model, like in a lakehouse, the lakehouse gets a SQL analytics endpoint, and you get a default semantic model with that lakehouse. So if you're trying to query the data, you can easily do that. So deleting and replacing the link was probably basically recreating the metadata and all the things for that table. Imagine if you're updating the link and you're adding a column or removing a column. Like how do the downstream sources, right? What does the SQL Analytics endpoint do when you have a new shortcut that you've updated and the definition is different? There's physical different metadata that supports that table. That was probably the reason why they said, no, we're not going to do that, because the SQL and the Power BI analysis services weren't able to support those kind of changes. So probably it makes sense because those are other compute engines you had to work with to get it to work correctly.
Right. So honestly, this is from a seamless point of view, this is really, I mean, like I said, we'll talk more about our processes, but I want to go through some of the other kind of updates as well.
Yeah.
So if you're into icebergs or if you're dealing with a lot of Delta tables, it's a lot easier to browse and access those tables across those particular data sources. So anything that you're dealing with a Delta or iceberg table, OneLake can automatically recognize that metadata, allowing it to be recognized in the browser experience. And I think a lot of people too, when we've talked about migration from other systems that, they're pretty heavy and dependent on and in the weeds with, this makes it a lot easier to, if not migrate, but seamlessly work with something that built over a long period of time. So,
yeah, I don't know how many people are using. Well, so my understanding of Snowflake right now, or at least the most experience I see here, a lot of people are building data in Snowflake or Snowflake ecosystem. I'm not seeing a ton of people going into Snowflake and saying, wow, I really want to bring a bunch of that data back into Power BI. They're kind of just using Snowflake as their permission layer, their security layer for everything. And it seems to me more of the idea that the Snowflake becomes a SQL endpoint to everything you're going to get into Power BI. I'm not hearing, again, and this isn't just in my world, I'm not hearing a lot of people really tightly integrating Snowflake into the Fabric ecosystem. It just kind of feels that they're still fairly separate at this point. Maybe that'll change over time, and maybe I'll get some more projects where we're doing tighter integration between Snowflake and Power BI or Fabric. Right now, I think the deeper integration that I see is Databricks. It's Databricks and Fabric all day. It feels like a lot of companies have Databricks, and the Databricks integration between that and the Power BI side is something that we're kind of trying to unpack and figure out how that works. I'm starting to believe we're getting to a place where bronze and silver can live in Databricks, and then the gold layer, physically storing those final tables, should live inside Fabric. Because there's other things we want to do at that gold layer. So previously I would say do bronze, silver, and gold all inside Databricks, which is fine. But I'm seeing the transition between like the BI team and then the data engineering team transitioning. It seems to be a better transition between silver and gold, because the gold tables are the refinement of those silver tables. A lot of times you just need those silver tables to be populated by data engineering, and then let the business team mull over the table, add the columns, shape them, adjust them, and then kind of own that layer of the lakehouse structure there a little bit. I'm finding success with that anyways.
No, and I think Mike, I think that's a big thing too for a lot of teams and organizations who are, again, they've been doing this for years. There's nothing new here in terms of the products and services, just where it lives. So I think that's exactly where this is geared for. Interesting you say that, how the heavy development that it would still be in the other platforms, but that kind of makes sense too.
It depends on the company strategy, right? So if you have a data engineering team that's not very Fabric centric, they're going to want to pick a tool that's been really reliable, been out in the market for a number of years. They're not going to, it's a risk for an organization to pick a Fabric, Microsoft Fabric, that's only been out for 2 years, right? That's a risk.
Right.
Is it going to do everything we want it to do? Is it going to have all the features we need? Is it going to have all the latest, greatest innovation stuff? I mean, it probably won't. Right now, you and I, Tommy, are already talking about like we're still kind of cleaning up the edges a little bit. We're still refining some of the user experiences. If a player who's been in the field for 10, 15 years, I don't know how long Databricks has been around. I know they've been around at least 10 years. But if they've been around for 10 years, they've got some experience. Like the Databricks team is the team that invented Spark. I mean, who's going to be a better knowledge at like what Spark can or cannot do and where its weaknesses are than the team that invented it? So that whole experience, I look at that going, well, yeah, it makes sense to me that organizations are going to want to pick something like that. I'm just not a big fan of Snowflake. I feel like it's an overpriced tool for what it does. And I think you can get more bang for your buck inside the Databricks space. That's kind of where I feel things are going.
Awesome. So a few other things, Mike, that we'll just kind of breeze through this because I really want to dive into you and how you've been using it. And honestly, your thoughts moving forward on if it changes any processes, but just a few quick ones as well.
Yeah.
Shortcut batch creation through REST APIs. So you can actually create shortcuts multiple, which is honestly something that's going like that I perked up about, because if I want to add, let's say, a date table to all my lake houses, right? And the single one. Well, no matter how many lake houses I have, we can automate that. Awesome. Love automation. OneLake shortcuts for Fabric SQL databases. So OneLake shortcuts now support connections to a Fabric SQL database. Again, pretty neat. I wonder if they'll ever do it the other way, but I don't think it would work where a Fabric table would actually be a shortcut. But I don't think that's going to be possible.
Say that again. What are you
saying?
Right
now, I can connect to a Fabric SQL table and add that as a shortcut in my lakehouse. Right? And my lakehouse can have a shortcut that's a Fabric SQL connection. But I want my Fabric SQL database to utilize shortcuts. Wouldn't that be neat?
I don't understand really.
So if one of my tables in SQL
doesn't care. You just give it the location of the lakehouse and it would just read it. That's what a shortcut is.
Right now, it's not available in a SQL database. So right now, I can, in my lakehouse, can add a shortcut from SQL.
Why won't you just connect to a different lakehouse? Can't you take a SQL server or SQL endpoint and just connect to a different lakehouse? Just actually establish the connection. It's just reading Delta tables at that point.
Anyways, but
I don't think I think a shortcut is the same. I think you can do it. My statement here is you can already do that. You can take a SQL the SQL data warehouse or the warehouse, and you can just connect to multiple lake houses and get the data you need from there. And it's like a shortcut. It doesn't actually live in the SQL server. I understand. I think what you're saying is you'd like it to be easier to create that remote linked item as a shortcut in the lake house and kind of represent the same thing. But you can already do it today by just making a new connection to a different lake house.
No, I got you. The confusion around SQL databases and endpoints and their differences for another day.
True.
And finally, external data sharing for OneLake shortcuts. So now allowing users to share shortcutted data with other tenants, which again, just another win. So Mike, all this to say with where shortcuts are, and they've really been out since more or less the start of Microsoft Fabric. It's one of the early major features that they integrated in OneLake. Mike, there's a lot here that I think to really digest. I use shortcuts all the time, and I more importantly have been working on developing different strategies for utilizing some of the best to really what that feature is. So before going any forward, Mike, let's just kind of digest for you how dependent are you on Fabric shortcuts and how to use them right now?
Yeah, we're doing some exploration around with some of our customers about making the shortcuts an item where you can use a security layer essentially, right? So there's this data engineering world of bronze and silver, and then there's like maybe the BI world of like the gold layer and the semantic model tables. And we're looking at this going like, okay, well, what happens when you have different tables of information, and when do you start sharing that out, right? So if you think about the users of your data platform, right, there's going to be very basic users. They're only going to care about the reports. They're only going to care about semantic models. Fine. This is probably not your target audience. But if you go one layer above that, so beyond a basic user, so let's maybe say an intermediate or more advanced user, you want to give them access to other aspects of your data. And maybe they are capable of writing their own SQL, or maybe they've been trained or want to just muck around with the data. Like, that's fine. So we have to have this ability to be able to hand over responsibility to other teams and give them basically one solution that handles basic users, intermediate users, and all the way to super advanced users. And so we're thinking at the advanced user level, here's a shortcut. Here's a lakehouse with a bunch of data in it from Gold that is a bunch of shortcuts. If you want, we can give you the relationships between the tables, but you're welcome to build your own thing, add your own data, supplement it with something else that you need for your business unit. So we're really seriously considering, like, looking at this information, saying this is a shortcut, is a easy mechanism to transition responsibility from one team to another team. And so when you have other teams that are highly technical and need access to the data, you don't need to be building a semantic model. You don't need to be building all these extra complicated things that you need to maintain and manage. You can give them direct access to the tables. So that's one area that I think we're exploring. I think that makes a lot of sense. One thing that's very much a challenge for me right now, and I don't know where this will fit in the Microsoft ecosystem later on, which is when I'm building on top of dev, I do a lot with teams that are bigger. And so we're now moving data from dev to test to prod. That development cycle of things. This is where we struggle, I think, a bit. And I think shortcuts could add a lot of value here, especially when you're trying to cut a branch from the development environment, make some data changes to the semantic model or data engineering or the notebooks, but you need those shortcuts to kind of exist to read the data. So I'm kind of the opinion here that when you're doing a branching strategy, there needs to be a way to programmatically create those shortcuts to the dev tables in your branch. That way I don't have to rerun all the data. I don't have to copy it all over again. And so right now, a lot of our pattern is, okay, cut a branch from dev. Okay, first thing we need to do is load the data, hydrate the data into the tables that are in the lakehouse. And then after we do that, then we can do our development. I'd like that step to go away. I'd like that step to be more dynamic. And I'd like to be able to specify when I make a branch of information, I'm automatically going to get the data automatically in the environment without having to do any extra copying of data. Because it's just more cost to run the CU to do that stuff. I feel like it should be easier to do that.
Yeah. So interesting that your two main use cases for shortcuts are from branching and dev, test, prod, and then also when you're dealing with responsibility. One I haven't thought about as much, but let's kind of dive into the responsibility one, because that's kind of the aha moment for me with shortcuts was
the transition of responsibility of data roles. Yeah. Okay.
Really the aha moment for me when it came to shortcuts and kind of seeing how they can be utilized really was that source of truth, so to speak. Again, a very basic, easy example here is if you had a date table that you wanted to make sure that every lakehouse was utilizing, well, it can come from one place. I don't have to do a copy job. I don't have to recreate that from somewhere else. So that is kind of one of the major implementations of utilizing kind of my references. And again, compared to really everything else, when we ever do this in Power BI, I always tell it to refresh that data. Even when I had data flows and I had that master customer table, well, it just
takes time.
It takes time. But again, the shortcuts makes that incredibly seamless and easy. So, but kind of walk me through that transition of responsibility, right? Because the ownership starts with those who are building that table, who have gone through that table and finally share, allowing people to connect to that shortcut, right?
I think master data is a good example of this kind of pattern. Master data is there's a team or there's a team that's building a part of the master data together, right? Often when you hand out master data to the organization, other teams will be like, well, we have this extra metadata that we want to add to it. We need to enhance it slightly, or we need to do something different to it. So the product number is still the product number, right? There's still some definition to some common elements that are inside that master data. So I think a good example here is the master data table coming from data engineering or from the central BI team. Here you go. Here's your master data. Mr. Department, you can supplement that data with whatever you want, right? Read that master data in. It's that contract, right? In the master data table, every ID of every product will always be filled out. We'll always have a product description name. And so the BI team or DE team, data engineering team, will have some standards around this is the information I'm going to give you. And it'll always be up to date based on the latest information. So maybe they're drawing the information out of like an SAP, maybe there's an Oracle system, maybe there's some other data system that's holding all your products and your parts that you sell. That now lives in a automated way. So that team owns going from the source system to the table, right? At some point you need to transition from, okay, well, we've done all that we can do with the data. We don't actually know how you're going to use it in the business unit. Like you may do something different to it, or you may need to add something or supplement it or whatever. Maybe there's a business unit who's attaching, customers to master data for whatever reason. You're doing some analysis there, whatever. That's fine. Here's the table. Here's the shortcut. Start here from this point. That is our that shortcut becomes the data contract between one team and another, and the second team can pick it up and then use that that shortcut. Now they can build notebooks on top of it. They can write SQL against it. They can join it with other data. Great, and now they're off to the races.
So here's the thing, though. When does the BI team then stop? And I think this is the idea here, right? Where contrary to everything else the BI team was responsible for, and especially when it was just Power BI, well, really all user input was what the business owned. And then after that, it was the BI team to really transform that data, work with them, like, et cetera. But now you're kind of almost, in a sense, flipping that on its head, where I'm going to give you the most basic potential table without any additional configuration. This is your, I don't want to say a template, but this is the base, right? How fleshed out is it? It's meant to be distributed in multiple places.
Mm-hmm.
That all of a sudden makes a lot more owners in the kitchen, or a lot of chefs, so to speak, where if I'm just giving this out to everyone, and again, let's take a basic example of all of your let's say sales regions, right? We just want to make sure that's tied to a person and whatever it may be. Well, if all the BI team's doing is we have mapped each state to a manager, and the rest is up to you, right? That, and let's say 18 different teams or 10 different teams connect to that same shortcut, then you have 10 different owners that are kind of doing their own thing, especially when you're dealing with master data. And again, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole when we're talking about other things, but this is one of the things that I'm seeing with shortcuts, where I wanted to give people the most, in a sense, not just fresh data, but also pick and choose what shortcuts I'm giving out. And I think there's kind of two categories here of this. There's what we'll call the raw shortcuts. This is, you needed that source data. Here you go. This is, we've connected to these different sources. We've combined Salesforce and XYZ together, but we don't know what, definitions look like. That is up to you. The table is created though, and that was something you never had access to. Go and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of shortcuts is going to be our master data, where this is things only that should be really used in reports. Anything that's modified, obviously would not reflect well, but are you seeing categories of types of shortcuts and the type of data you're giving out? Because both of your examples were much more from the developer side of moving the data along. And the approach I'm taking here with shortcuts is on kind of that distribution when you're working with multiple different teams. So, and I think both work, and that's kind of the beauty of shortcuts, but there's definitely multiple approaches here. have you looked at shortcuts yet and gone, okay, I'm going to not just create shortcuts, but there are different types of shortcuts I'm going to create?
I mean, no, I don't think there are different types. I mean, I think there's different purposes of why you may want to use different, shortcuts. So let's talk about one example here. One example with the lake house. When you connect to a shortcut, you are able to connect shortcuts from multiple different locations, right? So you can have a single lake house that has a lot of centralized data coming from a central team. It's coming out of your main reporting systems, SAP or Oracle, right? You can build a pipeline to get that table of data made. That could be a single lakehouse. That lakehouse could have all the SAP data that you care about in one single place. Once you have that, now you can start shortcutting to that data to other lakehouses, and now they can be business specific. And so there's a difference between business users, and there's difference between that and departments, right? So I'm thinking this is more of a department share versus like a business user share. And what I mean by that differently is usually when you get down to the business user level, they're not writing a bunch of SQL queries. They're not doing a bunch of like data engineering on top of things to build their own reports. They're kind of being given a collection of semantic models and maybe a handful of tables in a lakehouse they can go, build reports on top of using a SQL endpoint, something like that, right? So I'm thinking there's a distinction there. And when I talk departmental, I'm thinking a little bit bigger than just an individual business user. And when you get to the department level, some departments actually have one or two individuals that are their analysts, that are their specialists, they're pro users, they're higher end users of these data systems. So those teams can have their internal discussion of like, what is valuable to us, what data do we need to build, and so internal to that team, they can take those standard tables and use them. One other point that's been brought up here in the YouTube chat, which I'll just kind of point out here, is Paul was speaking about the ability to use shortcuts in a composite model. So a shortcut allows you to have multiple lakehouses, or making shortcuts allows you to virtualize data into multiple lakehouses, where you can now actually have master data living against business generated data, right? So the products table, right, we were talking about earlier, like the product master table, that can come from somewhere else. You can shortcut that in to your lakehouse, and then the business can go collect all the data they want. That's a really good use case. And then when you do this, that means from a tactical standpoint, I really like this feature because this is better than a composite model in the fact that when you're pulling all this data using shortcuts, you're not making a bunch of islands in the semantic model. So you're not limited by text strings going back and forth and simplifying, filtering the data down. The semantic model is actually going to be smart enough to load multiple lakehouses of data as if they are a import model, which is really, really powerful, I think, and underused in the space. So I just want to point that out and call out here. So did I answer your question, Tommy, or did I just kind of really go off on a side?
No. And I think that's such a huge part for me. I always look at these features in the eyes of from that adoption roadmap, and like, how does that help or hurt like adoption data culture at a company? And for me, and again, the things that I'm raw about are when it comes to that lack of trust. So this idea with shortcuts are, oh my gosh, I don't want to say I couldn't think of a better way to distribute my master data, but yeah, to your point, the fact that it can go into our semantic models, I believe you just said it last week, that you still see semantic models as really being, the forefront of everything in Fabric. And that's really the heartbeat of Fabric. And let's not forget that with all these amazing things here, yes, shortcuts can live in different areas. It can be a folder or it can be a Delta table, but the fact alone that we can have that customization is absolutely huge, where I'll give you all the records, I'll give you all the files so you can run with it, or all of your reference material, which I can see that being on your knowledge center, like a bunch of readmes for all the shortcuts at your organization, which again was not something we really could do with Power BI before, because you would have to talk about data flows and Power Query. This is really find this lake house. Here are the different tables that exist in there. So that management side is almost to be honest, the best way to organize your data. Because you're never dealing with refreshing, you're never dealing with, you know, something not working. It's that pointer connection. So yeah, for me, the shortcut win is from an organization point of view is that. But I'd be remiss if we didn't, unless you want to talk more about that from the global or from a team scale. But I would be remiss if we didn't kind of dive in for you personally, for us individually. What are some of the tricks that you've been doing with shortcuts or things that you've been testing out, especially in your normal development workflow? Because I'm amazed at all the different ways that I've been able to utilize this in different areas.
Yeah, I'll give you one of my ideas, and then I'll kick it back over to you, Tommy, to give what you've been using shortcuts for. So one of the main shortcuts we've been doing is we've been using Databricks a lot, and so Databricks becomes a very big source for us. Databricks has this ability to have a Databricks experience where you have a Unity catalog attached. And in some cases that makes sense, but in other cases we don't really want to go right to Databricks. Instead, we want to be able to create a bunch of shortcuts programmatically, going directly to the API, creating them all. And so what we were able to do is we were able to write a notebook that reads the Databricks API from Unity catalog, gets the list of tables, and then from those lists of tables, create a bulk list of shortcuts that are actually connecting to the Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage accounts. So not using Unity catalog, going right to the source of where those tables live. In our situation, the idea of being able to create all of these shortcuts using code is extremely useful because Databricks manages those tables and where they go. If you make a change to the table and Databricks decides, hey, we actually don't want you to use this table location anymore, they may change the name of the table. They may change the schema or update something. So in doing that schema update, they may make a change to the physical location of that table. So by using the Databricks API for Unity catalog and then grabbing the list of tables that I care about and then immediately creating the shortcuts inside Fabric with a notebook, you can just run that every day. You could just basically recreate those shortcuts as needed. That way you're always staying in sync, or if you're doing a data loading process, you could just verify that those links are correct. So that's something that we're doing a lot right now. We do a lot of deep integration between Databricks and the Fabric Lakehouses as a shortcut. So I think that's one of our primary use cases. What's the use case that you're using, Tommy?
Honestly, two big ones was actually the Dataverse of all things too. So we've always had this bridge up between anything in Dynamics or the Dataverse and trying to deal with that with Power BI, because we know it was the loading time and what it took to actually deal with the type of data. Well, I don't know if you knew this in Power Apps, but there's been this feature where you can actually connect to a Synapse instance and kind of sync data together into a storage blob. But you really didn't know really couldn't do much with that. But obviously now they've changed that. So now I can connect to a Fabric Lakehouse, and that becomes that synchronization. So I can quickly and easily connect to any table in my Dataverse and add that to my Lakehouse, and that's all via shortcut. There's a ton of reasons why I don't think a lot of people know this, but this definitely was finally one of those walls was coming down for me in terms of I finally, all these new things that I've been wanting to do are open for me. But just some things like that where there's something that we don't have to worry about refresh at all. But Mike, even just utilizing the Lakehouse, that kind of architecture of, like I said, the semantic model one has been one of my favorites, where I've been actually just testing just different things out. I know I can hear people in the chat or asking themselves, why are you using semantic models to push data? Kind of thing. Aren't there more efficient ways? Yes and no. I think there's definitely some kind of pretty efficient or really productive things that table does in Power BI, and just getting everything refined and just pushing that to my lake houses, which I've been then able to just kind of iterate over a notebook on, have been one of the, again, I wish I had this before kind of features. I'll give you an example, a quick example on that. I had a record of data that was all combined data sources in an existing Power BI semantic model And I want to do some more, we'll call it advanced analytics. What I've always done in the past was like kind of get a subset of data, export it, even create a paginated report, but it was very clunky. And again, it was all local and everything was on, it really siloed. Well, I have that table now in a Lakehouse, and I have an automated notebook to kind of really dive through, kind of index this, go through this different things, and then oh look, now that's another table in the freaking Lakehouse. So the fact that I think the biggest things is the Lakehouses are really utilizing us to keep everything seamless. Where if you're trying to do it, your advanced analytics, you want to export your data, because you have your certain formulas that you want that you work on. Well, again, that now breaks the chain of kind of that lineage, but also if you're up to date or not. And the fact that I can have this all seamless with a single refresh, I'm seeing this really extend to like that. One, the data itself, where I don't have 4 different files or 4 different artifacts that I've created to get to one answer. It all goes through a single kind of pipeline at this point.
I'm not sure I'm following your use case. What are you doing with this data? I don't really understand.
Yeah. So I have a table in the semantic model, and I'm now pointing it as a shortcut to a Lakehouse. I'm taking a notebook. Yeah.
You have and how's the table getting into the semantic model? It's like an import table into semantic model.
Yeah, it's an imported table, and it's obviously a few transformations, a few merges, a few different data sources that are only in Power BI.
So you're using a semantic model to do some data transformations, and I think something you missed or you did not communicate clearly was you're taking the table in the semantic model and you've turned the semantic model onto OneLake synchronization. You've turned that feature on, right? So data comes in different sources, tables being imported. Therefore, the semantic model has a table, but you can't reuse that table any other place because it's part of the semantic model. Now, you don't want people editing the table, but you want to reuse it in a different semantic model, some other place. So by turning on, and this is a feature of the semantic model, to do a OneLake sync, right, which means after the data is loaded, then the data will be stored down in the Lakehouse as a table that came from the semantic model. So then you can still use the semantic model to do the reporting, but then you have guaranteed that the Lakehouse table also is the exact same data that's inside the Power BI report. And as the report refreshes through the semantic model, the Lakehouse is getting the latest version of that data. Is that what you're trying to describe?
Yeah, so I might have missed the.
I was totally lost in what the heck you were doing.
But the fact that with Power BI there are data sources and certain things that are not available in Fabric, but are still available in Power BI desktop. So yeah, I am taking the final table from a Power BI desktop once it's published, it now becomes a nice table in my Lakehouse via the shortcut, no write backs. That new table in my Lakehouse, that shortcut, I'm then simply connecting to in a notebook to, again, go through what I need to do. And this is all part of the single pipeline. But really, I think the biggest things is with shortcuts. And there's an example of someone who used an Excel file, or that was open mirroring actually. But the shortcuts have a lot of ways that we can, again, not have to recreate the wheel, use everything that's already, in a sense, existing. But have you been using the semantic model, that feature a lot, a ton?
I've been dabbling in it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're finding that sometimes you have legacy reports that have a lot of data in them. I mean, especially ones that have, incremental refreshing or other kind of complex things. Sometimes it's just nice to have those data lake tables down. It does, when you turn on this OneLake synchronization, there is some level of compute that's being consumed during that writing data down to the Lakehouse. You just have to be mindful of that. You just have to be careful of yes, you are writing the data back down to the Lakehouse. You're getting it out of the semantic model, but it doesn't come for free. There is some minimal amount of compute usage to get the data to the Lakehouse. I think that's just an acceptable trade-off. So yeah, that's what I've been looking at there. One thing I just will note here, Tommy, you made a note around that the shortcuts are only read-only. That's not necessarily true. If you look at the documentation under the shortcut security, you can actually provide additional permissions. Now, I think by default, all shortcuts are created a read-only file and folder version of the shortcut. It starts with, that's like the default. That's the default experience with a shortcut. But if you turn on OneLake data access roles, you can then create you can write to the shortcut. So the shortcut can be something that data can push data to. So it's a two-way street, not just a read-only experience. It could be read and write if needed. So anyways, I just thought that was interesting, because I think a lot of people think of like a shortcut as like it's a virtualization of data. You can no longer write back to the original source. Well, you can adjust that property and you can allow people to write back to that shortcut if you want. So the data, basically it's a, I think of it this way. I think of it's a virtualization. It's a shortcut. It's a item, an object in a different lakehouse that points back to the original source of data. And then the permissions of that shortcut are, can you read, write, or you can just read the data that's coming from the source system. I think the most applicable use cases here is just a read version. I don't think you want to be giving out a lot of shortcuts to a lot of different teams or people that are read, write, but it doesn't, if you have a use case for that, I think you can use it. It's part of the solution. I'll just point that link out as well and put it in the chat.
I know we're getting near time, but I think I want to end and ask you as well, where are we going from here? And my really closing thought is I'm seeing this be one of those features or new technology that's going to change some existing processes, the way that we used to do things before, because we have an ability that, again, we never previously had in terms of moving data along that journey in an organization or from a development point of view. So for me, as I look forward with shortcuts, it's not just the new features that come out, but I think it's what it is today, what it already can do. What could that really alter in my own mental model of, from engineering, or really just being a source of truth in an organization? Again, this is one of those things to me that does change processes. It does change the way people perceive how we're supposed to push data through. So I really think it's a really good time to step back and kind of evaluate our methods, our kind of normal workloads or workflows, and see how we can utilize these a little more.
Yeah, I think in some ways I look at the lens of like things that were done previously in SQL databases and things that are now being done inside the Fabric world. And it feels like a lot of the Fabric things or the Spark elements are continually trying to mimic or do what SQL has been doing for years now. So the reason I bring this up is you have SQL databases that are a read-only database. Right. You have SQL. So this is essentially like a shortcut. You can connect to the database. You can read to it. You can actually do a linked table, I think is what it's called inside SQL. So it's like a table that's linked to another SQL server, and you're linking that table out. Again, I'm not a SQL DBA, so someone in the chat can correct me about linked tables if that's correct or not. But these are all features that already exist, or the concepts I think exist already inside SQL. I think this is just the way of the modern Fabric experience matching that same experience, right? I have data that I want to put in a single place. I want it to be read only. I want to give it out to a lot of people. Great. I don't want to give every table. I just want to give a handful of tables. So let's just build 3 or 4 shortcuts to this main central place of location. I mean, if you look at studying like databases, data warehouse design, data design inside organizations, this is commonly across like very common. There's a central warehouse that has all the tables of everything you would ever need in one central place. And then you give out little tiny data marts to people across your organization of things they need to use. This fits that pattern very well. You can now build little tiny data marts of measured tables or subsets of tables from the larger enterprise warehouse. So again, I really think this is a great use case of people transitioning between different departments, handing data responsibility off to other teams where they can look at the data, but they can't touch it and they can't modify the source of information. Because again, now you have that clean handoff transition of responsibility. So all this to say is I think this is going to change how we look at our data. I think it's going to add more flexibility to departments that have really strong SQL developers and power users. If you have teams of people that love to use and manage their own data, right? This is a great opportunity for you to have a centralized team build out the core of tables and then allow other teams to copy from those tables, build what they want, or other things as well. So I do think it's a feature that you need to be mindful of because it does change how I think we build inside the Fabric ecosystem.
Awesome. All right, man. I think that's a wrap.
All right. We're about an hour out now.
Right,
so
yeah.
What's your final thought on this on the shortcuts thing, Tommy? What are you going to message to people about your where you're going to land on this?
So I don't want to repeat my closing thought I just did, but you might have missed me saying that. But no, I think the biggest thing is really, I think really not just saying this is a neat feature, but I think it's worthy of taking a step back on a lot of your normal workloads or process and see if really something can change and how can I utilize this more or take advantage of this to not just alleviate time, but for taking less steps out of your work and also building more trust.
I think my final thought here is kind of around shortcuts aren't done. It seems like there's more development coming. There seems to be a lot more changes happening to them. They're getting better. I'd like to see me personally, I'd like to see tighter integration between shortcuts and the CI/CD process. I think that's getting better as we go. Not sure I'm fully on board with everything that's happening there. So there may need to be some additional work to refine part of that in the continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline pieces. And I'm thinking more around like a team of people developing and building things for development. I think shortcuts should be used there, but not in a traditional dev test prod scenario. It seems it's a little bit different. So that being said, I think we have some more there's some more feature development that needs to be occurring with these this experience with shortcuts. But at the end of the day, you do need to be mindful of them. I think they're extremely powerful. And for teams that are just clamoring and asking for data, seriously think about shortcuts. I think shortcuts is the way to go around having users engage with that content. All right. That being said, thank you all so much. We appreciate your time today. Our only ask is if you like this conversation, if you haven't used shortcuts or you're exploring it, or you have someone else who's thinking about shortcuts, hopefully some of the articles that we shared today and unpacked it for you as we had a conversation around this one, it helped you. So share it with somebody else. Let somebody else know that you found some useful part of this conversation around shortcuts. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. And please share with a friend since we do this for free. If you have a question, idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode, head over to powerbi.tips/podcast, leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. or Central, and join the conversation on all of Power BI Tips social media channels.
Awesome. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. We appreciate your ears. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.